government is evil. Government is the negation of liberty. You can't expect the government to evaluate the content of speech. That's why we have the First Amendment, because the people who created the country didn't trust the government.
Judge Andrew Napolitano talked about free speech, how it's not given to us by government. It's recognized by government, a natural right that pre-exists the state. That's not my line. That's straight from Jefferson, Madison, and the founders. And who says it better than Judge Andrew Napolitano, the host of the Judging Freedom podcast and author of many books, and one of the greatest lights in my life of my intellectual journey towards libertarianism. Judge Andrew Napolitano joining us live right now on the Wake Up America show. All rise. Good morning, Judge.
Good morning, Austin. Thank you for that generous, over-the-top introduction.
Thank you, Judge.
You know, this Jimmy Kimmel thing combined with Google recognizing that it was wrong to have succumbed to the Biden administration and suppress free speech with respect to COVID, including free speech of the most uniquely qualified person to talk about it, who happens to be a U.S. senator, a libertarian, and a physician. I speak, of course, of Rand Paul. All this is bigger than Jimmy Kimmel, and as tragic as the murder of Charlie Kirk was, and as unpleasant as the response from the head of the Federal Communications Commission has been, all of this may redound to the benefit of free speech, the recognition that free means absent the government having nothing to do with it, free from the government. Maybe more people on both ends of the political spectrum, because of the events of the past 10 days, are now recognizing that.
Judge, thank you for laying that out so clearly and eloquently and so succinctly. Excellent job there, Judge. I've spent the first hour of this show this morning playing clips of Barry Goldwater talking about the Civil Rights Act. We played some clips of him talking about public accommodations, private accommodations, because in this discussion is this sidestep of discussion about what Charlie Kirk had said about the Civil Rights Act and whether or not Christians should be forced to bake a cake, whether Jews should be forced to bake a cake for a Nazi wedding, et cetera, public versus private, voluntary versus authoritarian, the government versus private property. And in regards to how it applies to this discussion, we're looking at YouTube saying, we acted at the behest of the Biden administration and banned people for their free speech, which is a constitutional level violation. Is it not, Judge?
Yes, because the government was involved. If Google wanted to suppress speech that it didn't like, it owns the bulletin board. It can do that to its heart's content. But when it does it at the behest of the government, and the same Republicans in the House that are now rejoicing at Google's revelations attempted to force Google to carry certain websites that it didn't want to carry. That's just as wrong. The government can't use a carrot. It can't use a stick. It can't evaluate the content of speech. It can't be involved in speech, period.
Correct. If YouTube was deciding to remove those accounts of their own volition, you could say it's a private platform. It can do it at once. But when the government steps in to censor, that's a completely different situation. It's akin to the Civil Rights Act. If a person doesn't want to allow blacks to sit at their lunch counter, it's abhorrent. I disagree with it, but it should be allowed. In the modern context, I may not agree with the Christian baker and their views on homosexuality being so sinful that they refuse to serve them at their private business, but that's their own views and their own personal it's a religious liberty question, I think, at that level. It rises to that level, which is, again, a constitutional protection. So free speech itself should protect the racist. Or I'm not saying that that Christian man is a bigot. I don't know him or his heart, the Masterpiece Cake decision, but it would fundamentally protect bigotry. Doesn't the First Amendment also protect bigotry and speech that we hate, Judge?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is, now I'm going to sound like Murray Rothbard, the property rights argument is an easier one to make and to understand. Ownership or lawful occupation of property gives you the right to exclude for any reason, including the government. So if I'm the baker, I can exclude people from coming into my bake shop. I can exclude them from my website. I can exclude them from my phone call. That is an easier argument to make and to understand before you get into the First Amendment arguments of religion and speech. But the First Amendment arguments of religion and speech carry the day as well. In my view, Goldwater made a very, very principled argument against the Civil Rights Act of '64. Not that it restrained the states from making decisions based on race. The 14th Amendment was written to prevent the states from making those decisions, but because it reached into private property, an area that is not available for government regulation.
So, Judge Barry Goldwater, he made the principled constitutional argument, and for that, he was punished by the voters, and our country was committed to decades of war, inflation, the Great Society, and the destruction of civil liberties and civil rights throughout all of those years of Lyndon Johnson inflicted on our country. And now I'm going to ask you, Judge, as I prepare to represent the devil pro bono and do a little legal work of my own here, I ask that you will pray the rosary, pray for my soul later after I begin this conversation, and I will now argue the statist authoritarian view when it comes to why Jimmy Kimmel and his temporary firing may have been within the law, maybe not constitutional, but legal, as the FCC has laid out rules, broadcast rules, handed down to us from the Democrats themselves. FDR created this institution and created rules of that institution, which are that you can't spread lies, misinformation, and disinformation on publicly licensed airwaves. Would the correct answer be to delete the FCC entirely? Of course. But Judge, did you put people in prison? I mean, maybe you're familiar with the prisoner's dilemma, which is if two thieves steal a diamond, get caught, and they choose not to betray one another, then they can both go and split the money for the diamond later. But if one of them betrays the other one, then they can go and get the whole profits of the diamond later. And therefore, Barry Goldwater had no incentive to tell the truth about what he believed about the Civil Rights Act. Perhaps the country would have been better off if he had lied to the American people and said what he needed to say in order to win, so that we could have prevented the disaster and terror and destruction of Democrat rule. In other words, what I'm saying here is Jimmy Kimmel, if there are no solutions, only trade-offs, if the FCC cracking down on Jimmy Kimmel is wrong, it is a smaller harm than what the Democrats have done to this country than the small harm that a Republican might do by threatening a simple broadcast license. What are your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting and quite frankly bizarre argument of taking the lesser of two evils. But if you believe in natural rights, if you believe that our rights are truly inalienable, then the government has no business being involved in speech whatsoever. And much of the Federal Communications Act of 1934 is unconstitutional, even though it has many times been upheld by the courts. I mean, one person's lie is another person's opinion. If he were to stand there and say Charlie Kirk did not die, but a fake person who looked like him died, that would probably be a lie and probably be subject to suppression by the FCC. I don't think it should be. I think it should be subject to the will of the people watching. If you want to watch a crazy person claiming that an event that we know happened, in fact, didn't happen, you can watch it or you can change the channel. But under the law as it now exists, the FCC can jump in on things like that. But there's always a problem when the government evaluates the content of a speech, because the government hates and fears certain speech. The government's motivation is political. The government's motivation is not pure. The government is paternalistic and authoritarian, and it would rather tell us how to live. So the bottom line is, yes, we would have been better if Barry Goldwater had lied and got elected than tell the truth and lost. But I don't think the election in 1964 turned on the Civil Rights Act of 64. I don't think anybody could have defeated LBJ, because whoever had been JFK's vice president would have succeeded him in light of the emotion that followed the events of November 22nd. 1963. Emotions set in place by the Central Intelligence Agency.
Judge, you are literally the only person on this planet that I could have this kind of a level of nuanced and intelligent discussion with. This is why we call it Big Brain Time on Wednesdays with the judge, because again, that level of context and nuance, it doesn't exist in on other shows. Your own show, Judging Freedom, perhaps, and of course here, but I very rarely can have that level of a discussion of nuance and someone who knows and understands the history. I guess what I'm getting at, Judge, is I've been reading some of your fellow Italian book. His name is Niccolo Machiavelli. I think you know him quite well. Another
Il Principe, the Prince.
Il Principe. I've been reading The Prince lately, Judge, because I'm trying to find a way, not just for liberty to win, but for liberty to survive in the United States. And what I keep coming back to is that it seems as if in that scenario that I discussed with you earlier, which is the game theory, in the scenario where you always do the right thing, in the scenario where the good guy plays by the rules, the good guy always loses. They did full-blown calculations on this, on what happens when you do the right thing every single time. And what happened was that the people who did the right thing every single time, or who always followed the rules, always lost the game. And the people, and interestingly enough, the people who always broke the rules, the people who were never honest, they always lost the game. But the people who won the game were the people who saw what the other person was doing, their opponent was doing, and they did it back to him. An eye for an eye, the copycat. So in other words, what I'm asking is, like, when you just said there, like, would it have been better if Barry Goldwater had lied, and if it had turned on the Civil Rights Act, if it were, would the country have been better off? If you're going to do a harm, then do the smaller harm. In some sense, I mean, we libertarians like to believe, well, there's an ideal scenario, which is to get rid of the FCC, but that is not a possible scenario. Even the Republicans don't want to do that. So if there's a harm that must be done, when a lot of libertarians, Judge, will say, well, when the Democrats are in power, they're going to do it to us. Well, they were going to do that anyway. That doesn't frighten me anymore. And so now if the FCC jawbones Jimmy Kimmel after watching what they did to us during COVID-19 and knowing that they're going to do it to us again, it doesn't bother me. The free speech is gone. The principle's gone. And therefore what we're left with is a knife fight. On some sense, Judge, we have to fight back.
Liberty waxes and wanes. I predict a resurgence of free speech in the short run because of these two events, Google and Jimmy Kimmel. Even the president, this character, Brandon Carr, who should be fired, is a product of Trump and the MAGA manifestation. But most of those people, it appears, condemned what he said because they may be the beer and pretzel set, but they understand they don't want the government telling them what they can hear and what they can say.
Judge, that is the most elitist thing I've ever heard come out of your mouth. And I think here's the funny thing about that is that the people who understood that phrase that you just used are not the beer and pretzel set, so they don't get to be offended. If you understood that, you're not the beer and pretzel set. Somebody has to clip that, Judge. Please continue.
All right. Well, I mean, the rest is in the column that I wrote. I mean, government is evil. Government is the negation of liberty. You can't expect the government to evaluate the content of speech. That's why we have the First Amendment, because the people who created the country didn't trust the government. The guy who wrote the First Amendment also gave the most famous speech on the floor of the House of Representatives called the bank speech. Okay, it was about whether or not we could have a Federal Reserve. But in the bank speech, Madison outlines the inalienability of fundamental liberties. Chief among them is the freedom of speech.
You're 100% on your principle, Judge. It is important to get the principles right first. These days, now that I understand the principles, I'm ready to start bringing guns to knife fights. I'm ready to ensure that the Thomas Masseys of the world are protected. I'm ready to ensure that Senator Rand Paul will survive any primary challenge that may come at him from the right. And I'm ready to defend our free speech against those who don't believe in it. How can we live opposite an enemy that has done everything in their power to destroy free speech? How can we live amongst people in a country with people who are dedicated to the destruction of the values of this country, Judge? I mean, should we allow immigrants to come to this country who are explicitly stating that they will commit acts of terrorism here, that they will destroy the U.S. Constitution, and are planning on bombing the Statue of Liberty on Tuesday at 10 p.m.? There's some limits to what people can do or say in order to have order and stability and peace, and to be able to solve conflicts with nonviolence in this country. When you have terrorist groups like Antifa committed to acts of violence without some kind of proportionate response or disproportionate response, without bringing some kind of metaphorical gun to the knife fight, Judge, I fear that liberty will be lost to her enemies because her friends don't have the tactics or the skills to fight back. Do you understand sort of why I would feel that way?
Yeah, I don't share that view. Your view, in my opinion, most respectfully, and I love you, leads to Donald Trump blowing up speedboats because he thinks they're about to commit a crime. Is a threat free speech? Well, if the person issuing the threat has the present apparent ability to carry it out, then the answer is it is not free speech. If they do not have the present apparent ability to carry it out, then it is free speech. The classic case is Brandenburg versus Ohio, which had many, many threats in it, issued in Hamilton County, Ohio, to be carried out in Washington, D.C. He didn't have the ability to carry out the threats, which is why his speech was protected. So speech that threatens is protected unless the speaker has the ability at the moment of the speech to carry out the threat. So Antifa can say whatever they want, but until they throw the first bomb, they're not violating the law. And the same with some nefarious person who may come into the country. I'm not going to fall down this Orwellian rat hole of punishing people before they commit a crime.
No, I understand exactly why you would feel that way, Judge. There is a concept of preemption, however, and to preempt is to come before something. So I don't have to wait for someone to actually shoot me. Them drawing the gun and pointing at me is enough for me to kill them, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So a preemptive strike, a truly preemptive strike, is lawful and moral and justifiable.
Well, if the person has the present apparent ability, I mean, if somebody says, I'm going to kill you, you can't kill them. But if they take out a gun, of course, you can shoot them. If they're 1,300 miles away from the United States in a speedboat that can go another 50 miles, no matter what's in that boat, you can't kill them.
What if they are 1,300 miles away and they have a nuclear weapon and they could attack us within an hour by pressing that button? Can we preempt him?
Well, that's a different story. That's not what happened.
No, but
you would have to declare war on the entity from which they came. You can't detonate the nuclear weapon because of the consequences of detonating it, unless you know the megatonnage.
You would have to declare war, but the president does have the War Powers Act, which allows him to attack within 72 hours, I believe. But then he has to go to Congress in order to justify it, right?
Yeah, I have to. I don't want to run from a fascinating conversation, but I have to be on air at 30 after the.
Sure, Judge. Please give us a plug for your show before you go.
Well, I have Pepe Escobar from Beijing on this afternoon. Tomorrow, I have Colonel Douglas McGregor and Professor Jeffrey Sachs on Trump's turnaround on Ukraine. Does he really think Ukraine can win this land back from Russia, or is this some sort of a negotiating technique? That's what we're talking about today.
Watch it on Judging Freedom. Judge Andrew Napolitano, the great Judge Andrew Napolitano, the only person that we could have these kinds of nuanced, historical, and philosophical discussions. Thank you, Judge, for being so generous with your time.
God love you, Austin. Overbab. Already looking forward to next week's.
Thank you, Judge. Have a wonderful day. That's Judge Andrew Napolitano.